There are places on this planet where the government doesn't just discourage you from visiting, it forbids it, not as a formality, as your final warning. Some of these places carry death in the soil, some in the water, some in the creatures that evolved there for thousands of years without ever encountering a human being and never learned to fear one. Some were made dangerous by what governments decided to do to them and then left behind. 10 islands. Some restricted by law, some by physics, some by the kind of isolation that turns ordinary creatures into something the mainland never produced. None of them will make you feel welcome. If you're drawn to places like these, the ones the map labels but doesn't explain, subscribe before we go any further. Most people watching right now aren't subscribed yet, and what's coming is not something you want to miss. Adjust your headphones, get comfortable under your blanket, because the danger starts right now. Let's start. 33 kilometers off the coast of São Paulo state, there is an island the Brazilian Navy has kept closed to civilians since the 1920s. Not for military reasons, not for strategic resources. Because of what evolved there after 11,000 years of complete isolation. At the end of the last ice age, rising sea levels cut off a small piece of the Brazilian coast from the mainland. The snakes trapped on that new island had no ground-level predators to limit their numbers, and no mammals to hunt. What they did have, in abundance, were migratory seabirds that landed in the trees during their annual roots. And the problem with hunting a bird is simple. If your venom doesn't kill fast enough, the bird flies away before it falls. So the snakes adapted. Over millennia, they evolved a venom 3 to 5 times more potent than their mainland cousins, according to the BBC Science Focus and the Butantan Institute in São Paulo. Fast-acting enough to stop a seabird before it could lift off the branch. The species is called Bothrops insularis, the golden lancehead pit viper. It exists nowhere else on Earth. Between 2,000 and 4,000 of them live across just 43 hectares of island. The lancehead genus is already responsible for 90% of snakebite fatalities in Brazil on the mainland, according to Atlas Obscura. Here, the species is unique, more lethal, and packed into a space smaller than most city parks. A bite causes kidney failure, hemorrhage, necrosis of tissue surrounding the wound, and without treatment, death in under an hour. Researchers who receive federal authorization to visit must bring a doctor on the boat. The Navy actively patrols the waters, not only to keep humans away from the snakes, but to keep illegal poachers away from a species that is critically endangered. The golden lancehead survives only on this island. Disturb the ecosystem and it disappears from the planet entirely. The lighthouse on the island has been automated since 1920. There are no human residents. There is no infrastructure. Just 43 hectares and 4,000 snakes with nowhere else to be. In January of 1945, British and Indian forces landed on Ramree Island, off the coast of Burma. Their goal was strategic: capture the island's airfield and use it to extend Allied reach against Japanese positions. The Japanese garrison resisted for 6 weeks. When British troops finally closed in, roughly 1,000 Japanese soldiers faced a choice: surrender, which for many Japanese combatants in that war was considered the most dishonorable option imaginable, or attempt a crossing through 16 kilometers of mangrove swamp to reach the main Japanese force on the mainland. They chose the swamp. What followed became one of the most debated events of the entire Pacific War. The swamp was a perfect trap: salt water, mud that swallowed legs with every step, mosquitoes carrying malaria, scorpions, venomous snakes, and according to accounts from the time, saltwater crocodiles. Lieutenant Commander Bruce S. Wright, a Canadian officer who participated in the operation, described hearing screams in the darkness and seeing disturbances in the water that he attributed to crocodile attacks. His account spread widely and was eventually cited in some editions of the Guinness Book of World Records as the greatest number of human deaths ever recorded in a crocodile attack. But here's what the record doesn't tell you. A 1998 study by researchers Platt, Coe, and Thorbjarnarson, cited by crocattack.org, concluded that the actual number of soldiers killed specifically by crocodiles was likely between 10 and 15. The majority of the approximately 980 deaths were attributed to combat, drowning, disease, suicide, and the brutal physical conditions of the swamp itself. 20 soldiers were eventually recaptured by British forces. The historical debate over what exactly happened in that swamp has never been fully resolved. What is not disputed, nearly 1,000 men entered that mangrove in February of 1945. Almost none came out. And Ramree Island, today part of Myanmar's Rakhine state, still carries the ecological conditions that made that crossing deadly: dense mangrove, isolated terrain, and water that doesn't give up what goes in. This one is different from everything else on this list. The island is not dangerous because of what evolved there or what was done to it. It's dangerous because of who lives there and because they have made it perfectly clear, across every interaction ever attempted, that outsiders are not welcome. The Sentinelese are estimated to number between 50 and 400 individuals, according to Survival International. Anthropologists believe their ancestors migrated from Africa roughly 50,000 years ago. They hunt with spears and bows. They have had no sustained contact with the outside world. No one knows what language they speak. No one knows their social structure, their beliefs, or even exactly how many of them there are. What is known is that every attempt at contact, by outsiders, by governments, by researchers, has been met with hostility. Not confusion. Hostility. In 2006, 2 fishermen fell asleep in their boat and drifted close to the island overnight. They were killed. Indian authorities sent a helicopter to attempt recovery of the bodies. The helicopter was driven off by arrows. In November of 2018, a 27-year-old American missionary named John Allen Chau paid local fishermen to bring him to the island. He had been there before. He attempted contact multiple times over several days. On his third approach, he was killed with arrows. The fisherman who brought him watched it happen from the water, then returned the next morning and found his body on the beach. India did not prosecute anyone. Under the protection of Aboriginal tribe regulation, enacted in 1956, access to the island is illegal. The Sentinelese have effective legal autonomy within a 5-kilometer exclusion zone. John Chau's body remains on the island. The mission to recover it was abandoned because the risk to the recovery team was considered too high, and because any contact also risks exposing the Sentinelese to pathogens for which they have zero immunity. That last point matters more than it sounds. A common cold, introduced to a population with no immune history of it, can be fatal. The Sentinelese aren't just protecting their territory. They may, without knowing it, be protecting their survival. North Sentinel Island is one of the only places on Earth where a human being can legally be killed for attempting to enter. And the reason for that law is not cruelty. It is, on reflection, something closer to wisdom. In 1942, the British government requisitioned a small uninhabited island off the northwest coast of Scotland, Gruinard Island, 2 kilometers long, roughly 1 kilometer wide, surrounded by the cold waters of the Highlands. They chose it precisely because it was isolated and empty. What they planned to test there needed to stay there. Scientists from Porton Down, the British government's research facility for biological and chemical defense, were developing anthrax as a potential weapon of war. The specific strain was called Volum 14578, one of the most virulent forms of Bacillus anthracis known. The project was part of a broader program called Operation Vegetarian, a plan to drop anthrax-laced cattle cakes over German farmland, killing livestock and destabilizing the food supply. On Gruinard, they tested the delivery mechanism. Bombs packed with anthrax spores were detonated over flocks of sheep on the island. The goal was to determine whether the spores could be dispersed effectively through an explosive blast and whether the resulting contamination would be lethal. The answer to both questions was yes. The sheep died, and the spores, which had been released into the soil, did not. Anthrax spores can survive in soil for decades. By the time the war ended, Gruinard Island was so thoroughly contaminated that access was sealed off indefinitely. For almost 50 years, warning signs on the shoreline simply read, "Contaminated Island, keep off." In 1981, a group calling itself the Dark Harvest Commandos collected over 140 kilograms of soil from the island and distributed it near government facilities across the United Kingdom, including the Porton Down campus, demanding that the government begin cleanup. The soil was contaminated enough to be treated as a genuine biohazard threat, according to historical records cited by Science Direct. Decontamination finally began in 1986. The process involved spraying every square meter of the island with a solution of 5% formaldehyde in seawater, as confirmed in a peer-reviewed study published in the journal Applied and Environmental Microbiology in 2006. Test sheep were introduced in 1987. None died. The island was declared anthrax-free and returned to the original family in 1990. It's technically open to visitors now. But when the Glasgow Herald asked archaeologist Dr. Brian Moffat about the official safety declaration in 1990, his answer was direct. "I would not go walking on Gruinard. If anthrax is still active at other historical sites, there is no reason to suppose it has not survived on more recent ones." He is not wrong that the spore question remains complicated. But the island's most enduring lesson isn't about safety. It's about what a government decided to do to a piece of land, and how long the consequences lasted. There is an island 180 kilometers south of Tokyo where the law requires you to carry a gas mask at all times. Not as a precaution, not as emergency equipment stored somewhere accessible in case of disaster. On your person. Ready. Because the warning sirens do not give you time to go find yours. Miyakojima is one of Japan's Izu Islands, and it sits directly above an active volcanic system anchored by Mount Oyama, a 759-meter stratovolcano at the island's center. Stratovolcanoes are among the most volatile on Earth, built from alternating layers of lava and ash, prone to violent eruptions, and in this case, prone to continuous degassing between eruptions. The volcano has erupted 6 times in the 20th century alone, in 1940, 1962, 1983, and most catastrophically in 2000. In the 2000 eruption, the sulfur dioxide emissions from Mount Oyama reached levels that made the entire island incompatible with human survival. At peak, the volcano was releasing between 10,000 and 20,000 tons of sulfur dioxide per day, according to NASA Earth Observatory data from April 2002. Some reports from the period document surges reaching 42,000 tons in a single day. Every flight to and from the island was grounded. The entire population was evacuated. Residents lived displaced from their homes for 4.5 years. When they were finally allowed to return in February of 2005, the condition was non-negotiable. Gas masks, always. A third of the island remains officially uninhabitable, ground where the volcanic gas concentrations make habitation impossible regardless of season. The alarm system works on thresholds. When sulfur dioxide levels cross a designated limit, sirens sound. Residents have practiced the response until it's automatic. Mask on, move to safety, wait for the all clear. Tourists visit Miyakojima. The island has beaches, hiking trails, birdwatching. Gas masks are available for purchase at the ferry terminal and the Tourism Association store on arrival. It is, to the best of my knowledge, the only tourist destination on Earth where the visitor information specifically tells you where to buy survival equipment. The volcano continues to degage constantly. The pattern of eruptions, according to researchers who have studied the island's history, suggests roughly 20-year intervals. The last major eruption was 2000. The island is inhabited. The masks are ready. 28 miles west of San Francisco, visible from the city on a clear day, surrounded by some of the most productive marine waters on the West Coast. And underneath those waters, according to the U.S. Geological Survey, somewhere in the range of 47,800 drums and other containers of low-level radioactive waste dumped between 1946 and 1970. The Farallon Islands were chosen as a nuclear waste disposal site by the Atomic Energy Commission because they were remote enough, or so the reasoning went, to keep the waste far from populated areas. What the reasoning did not fully account for was what happens to a steel drum in salt water over decades. The drums were loaded onto barges at Hunters Point Shipyard in San Francisco. They were weighted with concrete. When drums floated to the surface despite the weighting, soldiers shot holes in them to help them sink faster. By 1990, investigators confirmed what many had suspected. A significant number of the barrels had broken open. The exact contents of each container and the precise location of thousands of them remain unknown. A 1992 survey by the U.S. Geological Survey using side-scan sonar found barrels in various states of preservation, from fully intact to completely disintegrated. The nuclear waste isn't the only radioactive material in the area. The USS Independence, a World War II aircraft carrier that had been deliberately stationed near nuclear tests at Bikini Atoll to measure blast effects, was towed to the Farallon site after the war and sunk. Carcasses of animals used in radiation experiments were also transported to the site for disposal, according to Atlas Obscura. In 1982, California Governor Jerry Brown wrote to the House Subcommittee on Oceanography with a line that has not aged well for anyone who read it at the time. The specter of leaking barrels of plutonium now lurks on the ocean bottom less than 50 miles from the Golden Gate. Today, the area is designated as the Gulf of the Farallones National Marine Sanctuary. It is one of the most important great white shark habitats on the Pacific coast. Seals, sea lions, whales, and seabirds all thrive here in what is genuinely one of the richest marine environments in North America. A comprehensive study of the ecological effects of the nuclear contamination on the local wildlife has, as of this recording, never been conducted. Access to the islands themselves is restricted to researchers authorized by the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. The waters are open. The drums are still down there. The coconut palms are there. The lagoon is the blue that makes you want to swim in it. The coral has recovered, remarkably actually, in ways scientists didn't predict. And the soil, according to a set of studies published in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences in 2019, still registers radiation levels higher than areas affected by both Chernobyl and Fukushima. Between 1946 and 1958, the United States detonated 23 nuclear devices at Bikini Atoll. The largest, Castle Bravo, on March 1, 1954, was a 15-megaton hydrogen bomb, the most powerful American nuclear test ever conducted at that point, according to the Nuclear Museum at the Atomic Heritage Foundation. It was also approximately 2.5 times more powerful than the scientists who designed it had calculated. The cloud of radioactive fallout drifted across inhabited atolls in the Marshall Islands, whose residents had not been evacuated or warned. People were covered in ash they later described as white powder that tasted sweet. Many developed severe radiation sickness within days. The long-term consequences included elevated rates of thyroid cancer and other radiation-related diseases across the Marshallese population. Before the tests began, in 1946, Navy Commodore Ben Wyatt met with the 167 people who lived on Bikini Atoll. He told them they were being asked to leave their home temporarily for the good of mankind, that their cooperation would help ensure future peace, that they would be able to return. They have never returned. The displaced Bikinians were moved first to Rongerik Atoll, where the food sources were insufficient to support the community. Many nearly starved. Subsequent relocations followed. Their descendants live dispersed across the Marshall Islands today. The Bikini Atoll remains listed as a UNESCO World Heritage Site, classified not as a natural wonder, but as a nuclear test site, and as a monument to the era of atomic weapons testing and its consequences. The cesium-137 in the soil is absorbed by the food crops, coconuts, pandanus, that would make the island self-sustaining for human life. According to the 2019 PNAS studies, analyzed by the American Geophysical Union Journal, EOS, food from the island remains unsafe to consume at subsistence levels. 167 people were asked to leave for the good of mankind. 70 years later, mankind has not figured out how to give their home back. Most people still call it Fraser Island, the name it held for most of its recorded history. The traditional Butchulla name, K'gari, was officially recognized by the Queensland government in 2023. In the Butchulla language, K'gari means paradise. It is the world's largest sand island, a UNESCO World Heritage Site, home to some of the clearest freshwater lakes on Earth, ancient rainforest growing directly from sand dunes, and the long, open beach of the eastern coast that draws close to 500,000 visitors every year. It is also home to approximately 200 dingoes. These are not domestic dogs that have gone feral. The dingoes of K'gari are considered by the Queensland Parks and Wildlife Service to be among the most genetically pure dingo populations in Australia. Isolated from crossbreeding with domestic animals long enough for their natural behavioral profile to remain fully intact, they are a recognized apex predator within the island's ecosystem, They hunt in coordinated groups. They have adapted their strategies to the island's specific prey, and when human behavior gives them an opening, they take it. The attack record is not ambiguous. In 2019, a 14-month-old toddler was dragged from a camper van at night. His skull was fractured. In 2023, according to NPR, a 23-year-old was attacked by 3 or 4 dingoes while jogging on the beach. Over 130 threatening or high-risk incidents between humans and dingoes were reported in a single year, according to ABC News Australia. K'gari remains open to visitors. The rules are real. Do not run near dingoes, do not feed them, do not approach them, stay alert with children at all times. The dingoes are real too, and the island's wildness, the thing that makes it worth protecting, is the same thing that makes those rules necessary. Paradise has conditions. On November 14, 1963, an Icelandic fisherman noticed smoke rising from the open ocean. Within 24 hours, a new island had broken the surface of the North Atlantic, born from an underwater eruption along a volcanic ridge 32 kilometers south of Iceland's coast. The eruption lasted 3.5 years. By the time it ended in 1967, Surtsey covered 2.7 square kilometers and reached a height of 171 meters. It was named after Surtur, the fire giant of Norse mythology, who carries a flaming sword at the end of the world. The Icelandic government declared the island a protected nature reserve in 1965, before the eruption was even finished. The logic was immediately clear. Here was a completely sterile landmass, formed in the modern era, with scientists already present to document what happened next. What would colonize it first? In what order? How long would each stage take? It was and remains one of the most valuable natural experiments in the history of ecology. What researchers have documented since 1964? The first bacteria and molds arrived within months, carried by ocean currents. The first vascular plant appeared in 1965. By the end of the first decade, 10 species of vascular plants had established themselves. By 2004, there were 60 plant species, 75 mosses, 71 lichens, 24 fungi, and the beginnings of soil, true soil, created by the accumulated decomposition of organic matter on bare volcanic rock. Today, Surtsey hosts over 335 species of invertebrates and more than 90 bird species. Seals haul out on its shores. A colony of seabirds has established itself in the island's interior. Surtsey became a UNESCO World Heritage Site in 2008. It is still eroding, losing roughly 1 hectare per year to wave action. Its surface now reduced to approximately 1.3 square kilometers. Scientists estimate it will remain above sea level for at least another century. 5 to 15 researchers are permitted to visit annually, according to Iceland.org. No tourists, no exceptions. The goal is to preserve the experiment, a piece of land that colonized itself without human interference, watched from a respectful distance. Here is what 3 meters of reptile, weighing up to 70 kilograms, with serrated teeth, powerful claws, and a running speed of 20 kilometers per hour, looks like as an apex predator. It does not rush you. It waits. Komodo Island, in the Lesser Sunda Islands of Indonesia, is the core habitat of the Komodo dragon, Varanus komodoensis, the largest living lizard on Earth. The Komodo National Park, designated a UNESCO World Heritage Site in 1991, protects an estimated 1,700 of them across several islands in the park, according to the IUCN and the Park Management Authority. For decades, the scientific understanding of how Komodo dragons killed was built around one mechanism: bacteria. The argument was that the dragons' mouths harbored such a severe concentration of pathogenic bacteria that even a bite that wasn't immediately fatal would cause a progressive infection, eventually killing the prey. This gave the animal an almost supernatural quality in popular understanding, a creature whose saliva was itself a weapon. In 2009, a research team led by biologist Brian Fry at the University of Melbourne published a study in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences that changed the picture. Using MRI imaging of a preserved specimen, the team identified venom glands in the lower jaw of the Komodo dragon, glands that produce a complex venom with potent anticoagulant properties. When the dragon bites, it injects this venom directly into the wound. The venom prevents the blood from clotting, causing progressive hemorrhage that weakens prey even as it attempts to flee. The bacteria still matter, the venom still matters, and so does the tracking. A Komodo dragon can follow prey across large distances using its forked tongue and Jacobson's organ, a sensory system that detects chemical trails left by bleeding animals. The combination of initial venom, progressive hemorrhage, and patient tracking means that prey, which escapes the initial attack, often does not escape the eventual consequence. The dragons also add a biological detail that remains genuinely remarkable. Female Komodo dragons can reproduce without fertilization, a process called parthenogenesis, documented in a study published in the Proceedings of the Royal Society B in 2006. In an isolated population, a single female can produce offspring without a male. The species has more options for survival than most. Attacks on humans are documented and ongoing. There are places in this world that still operate outside the rules we've built for ourselves. A soil that holds what we buried in it for 50 years. An island whose inhabitants have never agreed to be contacted. A lizard whose biology we only partially understood until 15 years ago. A gas that rises through the ground with no warning. A tribe of snakes that evolved, in isolation, to kill faster than any of their relatives on the mainland. These 10 islands exist on the same planet as everything familiar. Same satellite photographs, same coordinates, same ocean. But something in each of them refused to be made safe. By time, by science, or by the assumption that the world was built for human convenience. That refusal is the most honest thing about them. If you want more stories from places like these, the ones that don't make the brochure, the dangers that are real and documented and still not fully understood, subscribe to Marked Zone. That's where this channel lives. And tell me in the comments, which of these islands surprised you the most? I'll be reading. Until next time.